Elias Thorne was a man who owned things. He owned the vast, wind-swept grasslands of the Thorne Spread, a sprawling estate tucked into the foothills of the Wyoming mountains. He owned the thousands of cattle that bore his brand, thick-bodied creatures that survived the bitter winters better than most men. He owned the loyalty of 24 ranch hands, the respect of the bank in Cheyenne, and the silence of a house built with squared logs and thick glass windows, a fortress against the very land that had made him rich. He was a man who understood contracts. A signature on a piece of paper was a promise. A debt was a debt. And Elias Thorne always collected. On a bitter morning in January, with the sky the color of a fresh bruise, he rode out from that estate. He was not a man who enjoyed delegating tasks that involved weakness. He could have sent any of his foremen. But collecting this particular debt felt personal. It was a matter of principle. A man named Jedediah Dwyer had signed over the deed to his small homestead, a patch of hardscrabble land up in the high valley, as collateral for a loan of seed, tools, and 3 horses. The payment was 6 months overdue. The man, Dwyer, had vanished. Elias Thorne rode to seize the land. He rode a big gray stallion, a horse as hard and unforgiving as the landscape. He moved alone. The wind was a living thing, a predator that howled down from the peaks and tore at his heavy buffalo coat. It found the gap between his glove and his sleeve, stinging his wrist with a cold that felt like a razor cut. He ignored it. He had been ignoring discomfort his entire life. It was the first skill he had mastered, long before he learned to read a ledger. The snow was deep, 2 feet in the flats and piled into drifts as tall as a man in the cuts and valleys. The world was rendered in 2 colors, the blinding, endless white of the earth and the flat, oppressive gray of the sky. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of his stallion's hooves breaking the crust and the squeak of his saddle leather. He rode past reminders of failure. The land was littered with them. On the first day, he passed the skeleton of a homestead. The roof of the soddy had collapsed under the first heavy snow of November, leaving the low walls looking like a forgotten grave. A little farther on, a lone chimney stack stood guard over a pile of charred timbers. Fire or despair, it did not matter which. The result was the same. He saw a wagon, tilted on its side, one wheel pointing uselessly at the sky, frozen solid in the creek bed. This was a land of endings. It chewed up the hopeful and the weak, the men who came west with dreams thicker than their coats. It found their weaknesses: a bad crop, a sick child, a taste for whiskey, a streak of bad luck, and it pressed down until they broke. Elias had seen it happen 100 times. He had bet on it. He had built his fortune on the wreckage of other men's dreams. Dwyer was just another broken man, a fool who had likely run off to the goldfields in the Dakotas, leaving his debt and his land behind. Elias felt a cold contempt for him. A man who ran from his obligations deserved to lose everything. He made a cold camp that night. He found a small draw, sheltered from the main force of the wind by a stand of naked aspen. He did not build a large fire, just enough to thaw a block of salt pork and boil coffee. He cleared the snow, laid down his bedroll, and sat with his back against his saddle. The stallion tethered nearby. The horse's breath plumed in the frigid air. The cold was absolute. It sank into his bones, a deep, aching chill that his small fire could not fight. He pulled his coat tighter and stared into the flames. He was 42 years old, and he could not remember the last time he had felt truly warm. He did not mind the cold. The cold was honest. It made no promises it could not keep. He thought, briefly, of the house he had left. The big stone fireplace, the soft bed, the quiet Ute woman who kept his house, who would have hot food waiting for him whether he returned in a day or a month. He had built that life, nail by nail, dollar by dollar, to escape the very thing he was riding through. He had escaped, but he had never forgotten the feel of it. He slept for a couple of hours, the sleep of a man who rests but never relaxes. He was awake before the first hint of gray light touched the eastern peaks. He chewed frozen bread, saddled the stallion, and rode on. He found the Dwyer place near noon on the second day. It was worse than he had imagined. The cabin was nestled in a low pocket of land, a spot chosen so poorly that the wind had hammered it, piling snowdrifts up against the north and east walls, burying it almost to the eaves. It was small, barely a shack, built of unpeaked logs chinked with mud and grass. He would have thought it abandoned, another skeleton for the landscape. Except for one thing, a thin, pale curl of smoke, almost invisible against the gray sky, rose from the mud and stick chimney. He stopped the stallion 100 yards out. He watched the cabin. So, Dwyer was here, hiding, a cornered rat. Elias unbuttoned the flap of his holster, his hand resting near the butt of his Colt. He did not expect trouble, but he was a man who prepared for it. He urged the stallion forward, the horse plowing through the deep drift that served as a yard. He dismounted, his boots sinking almost to his knees. The snow had a hard crust that cracked under his weight. He walked to the door, a single plank of warped wood. He knocked. His glove was thick, and the sound was a dull, heavy thud. He heard nothing for a long moment, only the whine of the wind around the corner of the cabin. He knocked again, harder. "Jedediah Dwyer!" He heard a scuffling sound inside, a faint cry. A wooden bar scraped back from inside the door. The door opened a crack, then wider. It was not Jed Dwyer. It was a woman. She was thin, so thin he could see the sharp line of her cheekbones and the hollows beneath her eyes. Her hair was the color of dirty straw and pulled back in a severe knot. She wore a dress of faded brown wool, so worn it was shiny at the elbows, and patched with at least 3 different kinds of cloth. She was clutching a baby to her chest. The infant was wrapped in a piece of ragged quilt. Elias Thorne was a tall man, broad in the shoulder from his coat, and he blocked what little light the day offered. He looked down at her. She did not flinch. She just stared up at him, her eyes a washed-out, pale blue. They were eyes that had seen too much and expected nothing good. "I am looking for Jed Dwyer," Elias said. His voice was rough from the cold. The woman swallowed. Her throat moved, a small, bird-like motion. "He's gone," she said. Her voice was a low rasp. Elias felt a flash of irritation. "Gone where? Did he leave you here?" "He's dead." The words hung in the air between them. Frozen. Elias stared. This was not in his ledger. Dead? "Fever," she said, pulling the baby closer as a gust of wind shot into the gap. "Took him in October, before the first snow." Elias was silent. He looked past her, into the dim, smoky interior of the cabin. She had been here alone, all this time. "Are you Mrs. Dwyer?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "I am," she said. "Clara Dwyer. My name is Elias Thorne. Your husband—" "I know who you are," she interrupted. She shifted the baby, who let out a thin, mewling cry. "You hold the note for this land." He was taken aback by her directness. "I do?" "He left me with nothing," she said, no tremor in her voice. "Just a statement of fact. 5 children, and no money, not a dollar." The wind was knifing into his back. "May I come inside?" he asked. It was not a request for comfort. It was a command to finish his business. Clara Dwyer stepped back, holding the door open. Elias ducked his head to enter. He took his hat off, more from habit than politeness. The moment he stepped inside, the smell hit him. It was the smell of desperation. It was the smell of stale air, of wood smoke that did not draw properly, of unwashed bodies, of sickness. It was the smell of poverty, a thick, suffocating odor that clung to the damp. Cold logs. He had not smelled it in 20 years, but his body remembered it instantly. His throat tightened. The cabin was one room, a dirt floor, packed hard and uneven, A rusted, squat stove in one corner, the source of the smoke. A rough-hewn table. 2 stools. In the far corner, a low straw mattress on the floor, covered in a pile of ragged blankets and animal pelts. From that pile of blankets, 3 small faces stared at him with huge, terrified eyes. 2 little girls and a boy, none older than 8. They did not move. They just watched. Clara stood by the door, the baby in her arms. That was 4 children. Then he heard it, a cough. It came from a small cot, pushed close to the stove. It was a terrible sound, a dry, racking cough that shook the entire frame of the small bed. Elias looked. He saw a small child, a girl of perhaps 3 or 4, lying on the cot. Her face was flushed with fever, her hair matted to her head with sweat. Though the cabin was freezing cold, she coughed again, a deep, painful sound, and a shudder ran through her small body. "She has the fever, too," Clara said from behind him. Her voice was flat, the same that took her PA. Elias looked at the single shelf above the table. It was bare. He saw a burlap sack in the corner, rolled up, empty. There was no meat hanging from the rafters, no flour barrel. There was nothing. He turned back to the woman. He was a man of business. But this was chaos. This was starvation. The sick child on the cot coughed again, a weak, wet sound, and she whimpered. Clara Dwyer watched him. She saw the way his eyes took in the empty shelf, the sick child, the dirt floor. She saw the calculation in his face. Her chin came up. "You came for the land, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice clear in the small, terrible room. Elias hardened himself. He had come to do a job. "The debt is long overdue. Mrs. Dwyer, the land is forfeit, by the terms of the contract your husband signed." "I know," she said. She walked past him and stood by the stove, putting her back to the heat, as if to shield her sick child from his gaze. "I have no money to pay you. We have eaten the last of the seed grain. There is nothing left to sell. The land is mine, then," he said. It came out colder than he intended. "Yes," she said. He expected tears. He expected pleading. He expected her to fall to her knees and beg for mercy, for time. He had seen it before. Clara Dwyer did none of those things. She stood as upright as a shovel handle, her pale eyes fixed on his. "I will not beg you, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice quiet but carrying a steel he had not expected. "You are within your rights. Do what you came for. Take the land." Elias was stunned into silence. He did not know what to do. He could not, in this moment, tell this woman to take her 5 children, one of them dying, and walk out into the snow. The law said he could. His own rigid code of conduct said a debt was a debt. But the man standing in the cabin could not form the words. Clara looked over at the cot. The small girl was breathing in short, shallow gasps. "I have only one thing to ask of you," Clara said. Elias waited. "She is not going to last the night. I've seen this fever. I know how it ends." Her voice hitched, just once, the only crack he had heard in her armor. She cleared her throat and it was gone. "When she passes, I will need to bury her. The ground is frozen hard. It will take me time to dig. I cannot carry her far." She turned her gaze back to him. It was a look of such profound, exhausted sorrow that it struck him harder than the wind. "Give me 3 days, Mr. Thorne," she said. 3 days to bury my daughter. After that, you can have the cabin. We will be gone." Elias Thorne felt something break inside him. A cold, hard piece of the fortress he had built around himself. He looked at this woman, barefoot on the dirt floor, her ribs visible through the thin wool of her dress, asking not for her child's life, but for time to bury the body. He could not speak. He felt suffocated by the smell of sickness, by the memory of his own childhood, a memory he had buried deeper than any grave. He turned, his hand fumbling for the wooden latch of the door. "Mr. Thorne?" she called. He paused, his back to her. "The barn," she said. "The roof is mostly gone, but the lean-to on the west side is dry. You can shelter your horse there. If you mean to stay." He pulled the door open and stepped out into the blinding white and the clean, cutting cold. He pulled the air into his lungs, but it did not clear the image of the cabin from his mind. He was unsettled. Deeply, this woman had not fought him. She had accepted her fate, and in doing so, had trapped him. He led the stallion to the lean-to. It was, as she said, barely standing. A few old bales of moldy hay were in the corner. He unsaddled the horse, rubbed him down as best he could, and gave him the last of his oats. He could not ride away. He could not leave, not with her words hanging in the air. 3 days to bury my daughter. He took his bedroll from the horse. He would sleep in the barn. He did not sleep. He sat in the crumbling lean-to, wrapped in his buffalo coat and his blankets, and listened. The wind was relentless, but through the wind, he heard the sounds from the cabin. He heard the baby cry. It was not a strong, angry cry. It was a thin, hopeless wail that rose and fell, a sound of pure, empty hunger. It went on for hours, and he heard the coughing, the dry, painful rasp of the sick child. He closed his eyes, and he was not Elias Thorne, the cattle king. He was a boy of 8, in a tenement in St. Louis. On a straw pallet, he was listening to his own mother, dying of consumption, her breath rattling in her chest. He remembered the smell of sickness and poverty. He remembered the cold that blankets could not touch. He remembered her hand, all bone and dry skin, gripping his, "Be strong, Elia, do not let them see you weak." He had become strong. He had become so strong he had forgotten what weakness felt like. The baby's cry was a needle, stitching his past to his present. He sat there all night, frozen and awake, listening to the sounds of a life he had sworn he would never touch again. At the first hint of dawn, he was on his feet. He was stiff, his limbs aching with a cold that felt personal. He was angry. He was angry at Jedediah Dwyer for his weakness, for running, for leaving this ruin behind. He was angry at the woman for her pride, for not begging, for trapping him with her impossible request. He was angry at the memory of his mother. He needed to do something. He needed to hit something. He grabbed the axe from his saddle. He found a massive pine, felled by the wind months ago, near the edge of the property. He attacked it. He chopped wood for 2 hours, the thwack of the steel blade biting deep into the frozen wood, the only sound in the gray morning. He worked in a fury, his breath pluming, his coat thrown aside despite the cold. He did not stop until he had a pile of split logs as tall as his chest. As he worked, he saw movement. A young buck, driven from the high country by the snow, was sniffing at the moldy hay near the barn. Elias moved slowly, his anger replaced by the cold focus of a hunter. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard. The shot was clean, a single crack that echoed and was swallowed by the snow. He field-dressed the deer with practiced, efficient hands. He was a businessman, a rancher, but he had not forgotten the skills of survival. He carried a heavy haunch of the venison, fresh and dark. To the cabin, he stacked the wood he had cut near the door, a massive pile that would last them a week. He put the meat on top of the wood. He did not knock. He did not want to see her face. He did not want thanks. Thanks would be a chain, a new kind of debt, and he wanted no part of it. He had fulfilled her request. He had given her wood to keep her child warm, perhaps for the burial. He had given her food, so she would have the strength to dig. He had done his part. Elias Thorne walked back to the lean-to, saddled his gray stallion, and, without a word, he rode away from the cabin. He rode east, back toward the world he owned. But the sound of the baby crying, and the sight of the woman's washed-out blue eyes, followed him. Elias Thorne rode for 3 hours. The wind was at his back, a shove against his broad shoulders, pushing him east, away from the Dwyer cabin. With every mile, the air should have gotten cleaner. With every mile, the business should have felt more finished. He had done more than was required. He had left meat. He had left wood. He had left the woman to her grim task. The land would be his, legally, in 3 days. He could send a man back in the spring to post the notices. But the silence of his ride was different now. It was not the empty, clean silence of the high plains. It was a silence filled with the echo of a baby's hungry cry. It was filled with the sound of that terrible, wet cough. He pushed the stallion, forcing the animal through a drift. His mind focused on the ledger book waiting for him on his thick oak desk. He thought of the columns of figures, the neat black ink, the solid, reassuring weight of accounts settled. This Dwyer business was messy. It smelled of sickness and despair, 2 things he had built his entire life to escape. He rode past the tilted wagon he had seen on the way up, the one frozen in the creek. This time, he saw something he had missed, a small doll, its calico dress stiff with ice, lying half buried in the snow a few yards away. A child had dropped it, a child who had not made it. He stopped his horse. The stallion snorted, tossing its head, impatient in the cold. Elias stared at the doll. He thought of the 3 small faces in the pile of blankets. He thought of the sick child, her breath a shallow rattle. He thought of Clara Dwyer's voice. 3 days to bury my daughter. He was a man who hated loose ends. And this, he realized with a sudden, cold fury, was the loosest end he had ever encountered. What if the woman could not dig the grave? The ground was iron. What if the fever took another child? What if the venison was not enough? He was angry at himself. He was not a soft man. Soft men died out here. Soft men ended up frozen in creek beds, their children's dolls left to mark the spot. Business, he said aloud. The word sounded thin against the wind. Just unfinished business. He was lying to himself. He knew it. He was haunted. He was haunted by the one thing he thought he had conquered, the memory of weakness. Clara Dwyer's strength felt, somehow, like his own. It was the strength of a cornered animal, the strength of having nothing left to lose. He could not ride away from it. He pulled the stallion's rein, turning the big horse in a slow, heavy circle. The wind was in his face now, stinging his eyes, punishing him for his decision. He did not ride back fast. He rode with the grim determination of a man heading toward a job he despised. When he reached the cabin again, the sun was a low, weak smear in the afternoon sky. The pile of wood was smaller. The haunch of venison was gone from the doorstep. He dismounted and walked to the door. He did not knock this time. He just opened it. Clara Dwyer was on her knees by the stove, feeding small slivers of the venison into a pot of melting snow. She looked up when the cold air hit her back. Her face was not grateful. It was not welcoming. When she saw him, her eyes went flat and hard. It was the look of a person who had been given a moment of hope, only to have it snatched away. "You came back," she said. It was not a question. It was an accusation. "The business is not settled," Elias said, stepping inside and closing the door. The smell of the cabin was the same, sickness and smoke. But now there was the faint, rich scent of boiling meat underneath it. "The business is settled," she said, rising to her feet. The baby was asleep, tucked into a wooden crate near the stove. "I said 3 days. You have my word. We will be gone." "Where will you go?" he asked. "That is not part of your contract, Mr. Thorne." Her suspicion was a wall between them, thicker than the log cabin. She thought he was playing with her. She thought he had come back to watch, to ensure she kept her end of the bargain, perhaps to hurry her along. A rich man's cruel game. "You cannot dig in this ground," he said, ignoring her tone. "Not alone." "I will manage," she said. Elias looked at the pot. The broth was thin, barely clouded by the meat. He looked at the 3 children, huddled on the mattress. They were watching him. not as a man, but as a force of nature, like the wind or the snow. He turned his gaze to Clara, and for the first time, he truly saw her. He saw her hands. She was gripping the wooden spoon so hard her knuckles were white. Her hands were raw. The skin was split and bleeding around the nails, chapped purple from the cold. Frostbite. He knew it instantly. From hauling water, from wringing out rags in the snow. He looked at her feet, still bare on the cold dirt. He looked at the children. He saw the sharp angle of the oldest boy's jaw. He saw the way the patched wool of the girl's dress hung loose, as if there was nothing underneath it but sticks. He could count their ribs, even through the cloth. He turned his eyes to the sick child on the cot. Beth, the fever was still high. She was paler today, her breathing more shallow. "She needs medicine," Elias said. "There is no medicine," Clara snapped. "There is only what you see." Elias felt that old, familiar rage building. The anger at a world that let this happen. The anger at Jedediah Dwyer for his weakness. But mostly, the anger at his own inability to walk away. "Mrs. Dwyer," he said, his voice low. "I am not here to test you." "Then why are you here?" she whispered. "To watch us fail? To take the cabin the moment my daughter draws her last breath?" He had no answer for that, not one she would believe. So he acted. He turned and went back outside. He went to his horse and unstrapped his heavy canvas saddlebag. He brought it inside and set it on the rough table. Clara watched him, her arms crossed tight against her chest. He opened the bag. He pulled out a cloth sack of dried pinto beans, a solid block of salt, and his own tin of coffee. He put them on the table. "I am not a charity, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice shaking. "This is not charity." He lied, his back to her. "This is an advance. Against the land's value, I will add it to the debt." "Add it to the debt?" She let out a short, bitter laugh. "The debt that you are here to collect by taking the land. It keeps the ledger clean." He said. He did not look at her. He walked over to the cot. The small girl, Beth, was muttering in her fever dream. Her skin was dry and hot. Elias put his rough, gloved hand against her forehead. The heat was like an oven. He recognized this. This was not the fever that took men in the fall. This was lung fever. Pneumonia. "How long has she been coughing?" he asked. "A week," Clara said, her voice losing its edge, replaced by the hollow tone of fear. "She needs to sweat." Elias said, "You have any willow bark?" "No." "Whorehound? Yarrow?" "I have nothing." Elias cursed under his breath. He went to the water bucket by the door. It was half full, a skin of ice on top. He broke the ice with his fist and dipped a rag in the freezing water. He went back to the cot, wrung out the rag, and laid it on the child's forehead. Beth shivered, but her muttering eased for a moment. Elias turned. "Where is the leak?" Clara was bewildered. "What?" "The roof. It is leaking. I can see the snow on the rafters." "There," she pointed. "In the corner. The sod washed out in the last rain." "It will collapse," he said. He went back outside. He spent the next 3 hours on the roof of that cabin. The wind was a solid wall, trying to tear him from his perch. He used the axe to cut fresh blocks of frozen sod from the creek bank. He found loose planks on the ruined barn. He worked with a cold, methodical fury, patching the hole, his fingers numb inside his gloves, the wind driving snow into his face. He was not fixing a roof. He was building a wall. He was fighting the cold, fighting the sickness, fighting the memory of his own mother's death. When he came back inside, it was nearly dark. The cabin was warmer. The patch held. Clara had added beans and salt to the broth. It smelled like food now. She was feeding the children, one by one, with a single spoon. They ate like starving animals, their eyes wide, swallowing before they had even finished chewing. She saved a small bowl for the sick child. But Beth would not wake. She tried to spoon some broth into her mouth, but it dribbled out. Clara's face crumpled. She put the bowl down. The oldest boy, Samuel, who might have been 8, looked at Elias. He had been watching Elias work all afternoon. He had watched him check on Beth. He had watched him bring the beans. He spoke, his voice clear in the quiet cabin. "Mister, are you going to be our new PA?" The words hit the room like a physical blow. Elias froze. Clara moved so fast he almost did not see it. She did not strike the boy. She did not have to. Her words were the slap. "Samuel!" Her voice was not a yell. It was a low, vicious hiss that cut through the child's hope like a knife. "You hush your mouth. You hear me? There is no new PA. There is no one. There is only us. This man is here for the land. He is not staying. You will not look at him. You will not speak to him. Do not ever say that again." The boy flinched as if she had hit him. His face, which had held a flicker of life, went dull and afraid. He nodded, his eyes filling with tears he dared not shed. Clara turned her back on them all, her shoulders shaking. Elias felt the sting of it. The child had not been asking for a father. He had been asking for food, for warmth, for a man who could fight the cold. "Tss, Mrs. Dwyer," Elias said, his voice rough. "I am not here I am owed nothing by you. You are owed nothing by me. I am here to see to the property. That is all." She did not turn. "Then see to it, Mr. Thorne, and leave us be." But he did not leave. He could not. The night was a black, howling thing. The wind picked up, shrieking around the corners of the cabin, a sound like 1,000 mourning women. Snow began to drive against the single window pane. A blizzard had set in. They were trapped, all of them. He took the spot on the floor by the door, his saddle for a pillow, his buffalo coat for a blanket. Clara and the 4 children huddled together on the mattress for warmth. The night was endless. The baby cried. Beth coughed, a terrible, shallow hacking that seemed to get weaker every hour. Sometime, in the dark, Elias heard Clara begin to weep. It was not a loud sound. It was a silent, desperate, exhausted sobbing, muffled in the blankets. He lay there, staring at the dark rafters, and pretended he could not hear. He must have slept, because he woke to chaos. He woke choking. The cabin was black. Not dark, but black. Thick, oily smoke filled the air, stinging his eyes, scalding his lungs. He could not breathe. He heard screaming. "Clara! The children! Samuel! Alice!" The stove, the chimney. It had backed up. The wind had forced the smoke back down, or the snow had blocked the top. The cabin was filling with soot and poison. Elias was on his feet, his mind clear with the pure adrenaline of survival. He was a commander. "The door! Cover your mouths!" he roared. He lunged for the pile of blankets. He grabbed the 2 middle children, Alice and Mary, small, warm bundles under his arms. He kicked the door open, letting in a blast of freezing, clean air and a wall of snow. "Samuel," he yelled, "take them to the barn, now!" The boy, terrified but obedient, grabbed his sister's hands and plunged into the white darkness. Elias turned back into the smoke. Clara was on her knees, coughing, holding the baby. "Thomas!" "Beth!" she was screaming, crawling toward the cot. "I cannot find Beth." Elias grabbed Clara by the arm, hauling her to her feet. "Go! Get to the barn!" He shoved her, hard, out the door. He dropped to his hands and knees, where the air was clearer. The smoke was acrid, burning his throat. He crawled toward the stove. He found the cot. He swept his hand across it. Empty. His heart stopped. Had she fallen? He heard a small sound, a whimper, from under the cot. The girl, in her fever, had rolled off onto the dirt floor. He reached under, his hand closing on a small, thin arm. He pulled her out. She was limp, a dead weight. He stood, holding the child to his chest, and burst out of the cabin. Collapsing into the snowdrift, the blizzard was a raging, deafening wall of white. He could barely see the barn, a dark shape 20 yards away. Clara was halfway there, the baby clutched in her arms. She turned, her face a mask of terror, searching the smoke. "Elias!" she screamed. He staggered to his feet, holding Beth. He pushed through the snow, the wind tearing at him, his lungs aching. They made it to the lean-to. Samuel, Alice, and Mary were huddled in the moldy hay, sobbing. Clara put the baby down and grabbed Beth from his arms. She fell to her knees, checking the child. Beth was breathing. Shallow, but breathing. She was covered in soot, but she was alive. Clara counted them. Samuel, Alice, Mary, Thomas, Beth. All 5. She looked up at Elias. He stood in the opening of the lean-to, a dark silhouette against the driving snow. His face and hands were black with soot. He was coughing, spitting the grime from his lungs. She did not thank him. Her face, streaked with tears and soot, was a mask of pure, unbridled fury. She began to shake. It was not the cold. It was a tremor that started deep inside her. "Why?" she screamed at him, her voice cracking, torn away by the wind. "Why did you do that?" Elias stared, confused. "The smoke." "You could have let us die," she shrieked, hysteria taking over. "You could have stayed by the door. You could have let it happen. It would have been clean. You could have taken the land clean. No widow, no sick children, no one to see. Why did you not let us die?" She was confessing the deepest, darkest secret of her despair. That survival was the real torture. That death would have been a mercy. She lunged at him, her small, frost-bitten fists beating uselessly against the thick buffalo hide of his coat. "Why?" Elias Thorne did not know what to say. He had no words for this kind of pain. He was a man of ledgers and contracts, of horses and cattle. So he did the only thing he could. He reached out and grabbed her. He pulled her against his chest, his arms locking around her small, shaking body. He held her hard, anchoring her against the storm, against her own grief. Clara Dwyer fought him for a moment, and then all the strength, all that pride that had held her upright, broke. She collapsed against him, her face buried in his coat, and she wept. Elias held her. He stood in the mouth of the ruined barn, the blizzard howling around them, the children crying in the hay, and the sick child breathing shallowly at his feet. He held this ruined woman, this stranger, and said nothing at all. The storm that had nearly killed them was the thing that saved them. It raged for 2 days, a howling white nightmare that sealed the valley. The snow piled up, burying the cabin, but inside, they were alive. The lean-to was frozen, the horses shivering, but Elias and Clara and the 5 children were back in the cabin. The smoke was gone. In its place was a fine black dust of soot that covered everything. It was on their skin, in their hair, in their mouths. Clara, in the gray morning light, looked at the ruin of her home. She was quiet. The hysteria of the night before was gone, burned out of her, leaving a cold, hard ash of shame. She would not look at Elias. She felt his rescue not as a kindness, but as a judgment. He had seen her break. Elias knew he could not leave. The blizzard had made the decision for him. The passes would be choked for weeks, and he knew, with a certainty that settled in his gut like a cold stone, that if he left, this family would not see the spring. He cleared his throat. The cabin was silent, save for Beth's quiet breathing. The fever, the smoke, the icy air, it had all conspired to either kill her or save her. She was weak, but her skin was cool. The fever had broken. "Mrs. Dwyer," Elias said. His voice was rough. Clara flinched, but did not turn from the stove, where she was scraping soot from the iron. "This property, it is my asset," he said, the words stiff and formal. He was a man grasping for the familiar language of business, a shield against the raw emotion of the night. "I cannot have it fall to ruin." She turned, her face streaked with black, her eyes hollow. "It is already ruined, Mr. Thorne." "No," he said. It came out sharper than he intended. "The chimney is faulty. The barn roof is caving in. The fences are down. I cannot auction a pile of rubble." There it was, an excuse, a reason that was not based on the feel of her shaking body in his arms or the memory of his own dying mother. It was business. "Auction?" she whispered. "In the spring," he said, lying. "When the thaw comes, I will put the property up for auction to settle the debt. It is the only proper way." Clara stared at him. She knew what this meant. He was giving her time. He was giving her the winter. She did not know why. She was too tired, too suspicious, to believe it was kindness. It was a game. A rich man's game. "And until then?" she asked, her voice flat. "Until then," Elias said, pulling on his heavy coat, "I will see to it that the asset is in saleable condition. I will repair the barn. I will fix the chimney. I will stay, to protect my investment." He was giving her a role she could understand. He was not her savior. He was her landlord. He was the man who held the note. Clara looked at her 5 children. Samuel, his face older than his 8 years, was watching Elias. Alice and Mary were huddled under the one clean blanket. Thomas, the baby, was finally asleep. Beth was living. She gave a single, curt nod. "On your terms, Mr. Thorne." It was a truce, an uneasy peace, built on a foundation of soot and a mutual lie. Elias began to work. He was a man who thought best when his hands were busy. He slept in the lean-to. He refused to sleep in the cabin. Even after the blizzard passed, the lean-to was cold, drafty, but it was his, it was separate. His first task was the chimney. He climbed onto the roof, the cold so bitter it burned his lungs. He dismantled the top courses, finding what he expected. Jedediah Dwyer had built it with more mud than rock, and the whole thing had slumped. The flue choked. He worked with a grim, focused energy. He needed clay. He took the shovel and the axe and went to the creek bed, where he hacked at the frozen bank until he had a pile of icy clay. He mixed it with snow and dry grass from the barn, his hands, even in his gloves, aching and numb. Clara watched him from the cabin window. She watched him haul the heavy rocks. She watched him work in the wind, his face set, never pausing, never resting. Inside, she had her own work. She scrubbed the cabin. She washed every blanket, every piece of clothing. In snow, her hands cracking open in the cold, she scrubbed the soot from the walls, from the floor. She was trying to scrub away the smell of death, the smell of despair. The children, seeing this new, strange routine, began to change. They were still quiet, still like small, wild animals. But they were fed. Elias had gone out and shot another deer. There was meat in the pot. The beans were a solid, comforting presence. Samuel, the oldest, began to follow Elias. He would stand at a distance, watching the man work. Elias, awkward and silent, ignored him at first. He did not know how to talk to children. One afternoon, Elias was splitting the last of the big pine log. Samuel stepped forward. "My PA," the boy said, his voice small. He never liked the axe. He said it was stupid work." Elias brought the axe down, splitting around in two. He did not look at the boy. "Your PA was a fool," he said. "It was not cruel. It was a simple fact. Work is work. Stupid is letting your family freeze." He expected the boy to run or cry. Instead, Samuel nodded. He picked up one of the split pieces and carried it to the cabin door. He came back for another. He worked all afternoon, stacking the wood, his small body straining, his face serious. Elias did not praise him. He did not thank him. He just nodded. Once, When the pile was finished, for Samuel, it was enough. The days fell into a pattern. Elias rose before dawn. He checked the horses. He fixed what was broken. He was appalled by the state of the homestead. Jedediah Dwyer had let everything rot. The barn roof was a sieve. The tools were rusted and dull. The fences were useless loops of wire. Elias started on the barn roof. It was dangerous work, alone. He hauled planks from the ruined horse corral, patching the holes, replacing the rotted sod. Clara would bring him coffee at noon. She would set the tin cup on a log and walk away. She would not speak. She kept her distance. She was terrified of him, not of his anger, but of his presence. He was a constant reminder of what she had lost, of how far she had fallen. She had been a respectable woman once. Now she was a widow, living on the charity of the man who was taking her home. She saw the way he looked at the rusted tools, the way he fixed the broken latch on her door. She saw his judgment in every repaired plank. She kept the children close. She mended their clothes. She taught Samuel his letters. She created a small, fierce world inside the cabin, and Elias Thorne was not allowed in. But the cabin was one room. The tension was a living thing. It simmered in the small space, thick as the winter air. They avoided being alone. When he came in at night, his coat covered in snow, she would already be on the floor with the children, her back to him. He would take his supper on the stool by the door, and she would pretend to be asleep. They avoided touching. If they passed in the doorway, they would flatten themselves against the logs, careful not to brush arms. Beth was getting stronger. She was a pale, thin child, but she was walking again. Sometimes she would watch Elias while he sat cleaning his rifle, her eyes wide and curious. One evening, the tension broke. Clara was moving the heavy pot of bean soup from the stove to the table. The pot was iron. The rag she used as a holder was thin. She had been on her feet all day, and her arms were weak. The hot iron slipped. She cried out, a sharp, choked sound, as the pot tilted. Hot broth splashed over the side, over her hand. She dropped the pot, saving it from spilling, but her hand was scalded. She stood frozen, biting her lip, refusing to cry, tears springing to her eyes. Elias was on his feet in an instant. The children stared, frightened by the sound. "What is it?" he demanded. "Nothing," she gasped, cradling her hand to her chest. "It is fine. I am fine." He did not listen. He took her by the shoulder and turned her, his grip firm. "Let me see." "It is just a small burn, Mr. Thorne." "Clara," he said. His voice was low, an order. "Show me the hand." She opened her fist. Her palm was raw, red, a large blister already forming. A string of curses died in his throat. "Snow," he said. He grabbed her good arm, pulled the door open, and marched her outside. He pushed her burned hand deep into the snowdrift by the step. Clara gasped, the cold so intense it was a new kind of pain. "It hurts." "Hold it there," he said, his hand on her shoulder, keeping her in place. "It will stop the blistering. It will draw the heat." They stood there in the freezing, blue twilight. He was standing behind her, his body a shield against the wind. She was trembling, from the pain, from the shock. He could feel the small shudders run through her. He was too close. He could smell the clean, sharp scent of the snow and the faint, smoky scent of her hair. He held her there for a minute, his hand solid on her shoulder. The silence was absolute. Finally, he said, "Enough." He led her back inside. The children were huddled on the mattress, watching. He sat her on the stool. "Stay." He went to his saddlebag, which he kept by the door. He pulled out a small tin. "What is that?" she asked, her voice watery. "Salve for the horses," he said. "It is clean." He knelt in front of her. He took a rag and gently, so gently, patted her hand dry. She winced. I know, he said, his voice quiet. He opened the tin. He dipped his fingers in the grease and, looking at her hand, not her face, he began to work the salve into the burn. His hands were rough. They were calloused, scarred. The hands of a man who worked, but his touch was light. It did not hurt. Clara watched him. She watched his dark head, bent over her hand in the lantern light. She watched the concentration in his face. This was a man who owned thousands of acres, thousands of cattle, and he was kneeling on her dirt floor, tending to her. He finished and wrapped her hand in a strip of clean cloth. His fingers lingered on her wrist. He held her hand in his. It looked so small. She did not pull away. He looked up, and his eyes met hers. In that moment, the truce, the lie about the auction, the distance she had fought to keep, it all dissolved. They were just a man and a woman, alone in a cabin, surrounded by winter. He let go of her hand, slowly, and stood up. "Be careful with it," he said, his voice thick. He turned and went outside, into the cold. To chop wood he did not need. The storm that night was different. It was a storm of wind and sleet, a violent, angry storm that rattled the cabin. Elias was forced inside. He sat on his stool, mending a bridle. The children were asleep, a pile of limbs under the blankets. Clara sat at the table, her bandaged hand in her lap. She could not sew. She could not cook. She was just sitting. The silence in the cabin was heavier than the snow on the roof. She had to break it. He was not a good man. Elias did not look up from the leather strap. "Who?" "My husband," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but he heard it. "Jedediah, I know what you must think of him. Of me." "It does not matter what I think," Elias said, his hands still. "It matters to me." She needed to say it. She needed to make him understand. "That debt, the one you came to collect, it was not for seed. It was not for the horses." Elias looked at her. "It was for whiskey," she said, her voice flat. All the shame burned out of it. "And cards. He went to Cheyenne. He thought he could get rich. He lost. He kept losing. He borrowed from you, and he lied to me. He said it was for tools." She stared at the wall, at a crack in the logs. "He was a bitter man at the end. He hated this land. He hated me for being here. He hated the children for being hungry. He was weak." She looked at Elias, her eyes finding his in the dim light. "When he got the fever, I prayed for him, for the first few days. But he was mean. He was so mean. By the end, Mr. Thorne. I just prayed it would be over. God forgive me. I hated him. I hated him for what he did to us. And I still mourn the man I married, the one who promised me this." She waved her good hand at the cabin. Elias put the bridle down on the floor. He understood this. He understood it to his bones. "I was born poor, Mrs. Dwyer," he said, his voice low, "in a room that made this one look like a palace. My mother, she died of sickness, consumption. We had nothing. I watched her waste away. I swore, when she died, that I would never be weak again. I built everything I have on that promise." He stood up. He was too large for the room. He paced. 1 step, 2. "I despise weakness," he said. "I despise men like your husband. Men who give in, men who break and let everyone else pay the price." Clara looked down at her lap, at her bandaged hand. "Like me," she whispered. He stopped. He turned to her. "No," he said, his voice raw. "Not like you. I have seen you. You are barefoot in the snow. You are starving. You were ready to bury your own child. But you have not given in. You have not broken." She looked up at him, stunned. He did not see her as weak. He saw her. "You saved my children," she whispered. "From the smoke. You bandaged my hand. You gave us food. I thank you, Elias." She had used his name. It was the first time. The sound of it, in her voice, in this cabin, undid him. He moved toward her. He stood in front of her. So close she had to tilt her head back to see his face. The lantern light carved shadows under his cheekbones. He reached out. Not for her. He reached out and, with one finger, he brushed her wrist, the one attached to the bandaged hand. It was the lightest touch. A question. She did not pull away. She did not move. She just watched him. Her breath caught in her throat. He saw the small pulse beating in her neck. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes. And something else. Something that had not been there before. He started to lean down. She started to lift her chin. The small space between them was electric. Bang, bang, bang. A fist hammered on the cabin door. A violent, drunken, angry sound. They sprang apart, guilty, startled. The children woke up, crying. "Clara!" a voice roared from outside, slurred and furious. "Clara Dwyer, I know you're in there. Open this door. Damn you! I am freezing!" Clara's face went white with terror. "Amos," she breathed. "It is Jedediah's brother." Elias's face went dark. He was a man of order. This was chaos. He motioned for her to stay back. He walked to the door, his movements measured, angry. He lifted the heavy bar. The door flew open, and a man stumbled in, bringing a blast of cold air and the stink of cheap whiskey. He was thin, like Jedediah, but meaner. His eyes were bloodshot, his face chapped. Well, Amos Dwyer sneered, brushing snow from his coat. Warm as toast. And here I am? He stopped. He saw Elias. He saw the size of him. He saw the authority. He saw the way Elias stood, protecting the cabin. Amos's eyes narrowed into slits. He laughed, a wet, ugly sound. Jed ain't even cold, and you found a new buck to— "Amos, you are drunk," Clara said, her voice shaking but hard. "Get out!" "Get out?" Amos laughed again. "I ain't going nowhere. This here is my land, my brother's land. I'm his only kin. I'm here to claim what is mine. That means the cabin, the land, and you, sister." He took a slimy step toward her. Elias moved, blocking his path. "The land is not yours," Elias said, his voice a low growl. "It is held as collateral, against a debt, by me." "Oh, I see." Amos's face lit with a mean understanding. "You're him. You're Thorn, the one who ruined Jed, and now you're here to do what? Take his widow for the rest of the payment." He looked past Elias, at Clara, his face twisting with rage and envy. "You cheap woman," he spat. "Playing the grieving widow. You're a—" He never finished the word. Elias's fist moved. It was not a barroom swing. It was a short, brutal, powerful punch that landed with the sound of breaking bone. Amos Dwyer's head snapped back. His eyes rolled up. He collapsed, unconscious before he hit the dirt floor. The children were screaming. Elias stood over the body, his hand stinging, his chest heaving. Clara was pressed against the far wall, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. Elias looked at her. "Get his feet," he said. He grabbed Amos under the arms. Clara, shaking, took the man's frozen boots. Together, they dragged the body to the door. Elias opened it, looked out into the black, sleety night, and with a grunt of pure disgust, he threw Amos Dwyer out into a snowdrift. He slammed the door and dropped the bar. He turned, breathing hard. He looked at Clara, at the crying children. "You'll never come near them again," he promised. The sound of the bar dropping back into place was a heavy, final thud in the small cabin. Outside, there was a muffled groan as Amos Dwyer woke up in the snowdrift, followed by a string of curses that the wind tore apart. The children were screaming. Samuel had his arms around his sisters, and Clara was clutching the baby. But the terror was absolute. The violence had broken the thin piece of their survival. Elias turned from the door. His face was granite, his knuckles split and bleeding from the punch. He looked at the chaos, the crying children, and then at Clara. She was pressed against the far wall, her hand, the one he had bandaged, over her mouth. Her eyes were wide, not with gratitude, but with a new, deeper horror. The moment the children's sobs quieted to whimpers, she slid down the wall until she was sitting on the dirt floor, her head in her hands. "He is gone! Clara!" Elias said. His voice was rough. She began to shake, a terrible, low sound coming from her throat. It was not a cry. It was a dry, racking sob of pure shame. "Do you see?" she whispered, her voice muffled by her hands. "Do you see what you have done?" Elias knelt, his knees cracking. He was confused. "I protected you." You... She looked up, her face a mask of anguish, tears cutting clean paths through the soot of the stove. "He said it. He said what they will all say. He called me that. He said you were that I was..." She could not say the word. She did not have to. "You made me forget," she accused him, her voice rising to a raw whisper. "You came here, you fixed the roof, you brought food, you bandaged my hand, you made me forget what I am. You are a mother, a survivor," he said, his voice low. "I am a ruin," she cried, hitting the floor with her good fist. "I am the widow Dwyer. I am the woman whose husband left her nothing but shame and debt. I am a charity case, and now I am the woman the rich mister. Thorne is keeping in a cabin, the harlot he punched a man for." She was right. Amos Dwyer, drunk and bitter, would carry that story to every saloon and mercantile between here and Cheyenne. Elias had not saved her reputation. He had destroyed it. Elias stood up. He walked to the door and braced his hand against the log frame, staring out the small window into the blackness. He was a man who solved problems with money, with fences, or with his fists. He had just used his fist, and he had made everything worse. He understood shame. He had spent his life building a fortress of money to keep it out. Now, he had brought it down on her head. "I will leave," he said, his back to her. She stopped crying, her breath hitching. "I will ride out in the morning," he said, his voice flat. "All business. The winter is breaking. I will send one of my men, a married man. He will bring supplies, flour, salt pork, beans, enough to last you and the children until summer. He will leave them on the step. He will not speak to you." He was offering her a clean escape. From him. "The debt," he said, "is settled. The land it is nothing. You can stay. I will not come back. No one will bother you." He was offering her everything he thought she wanted, survival, and to be left alone. He reached for his coat, which was hanging on a peg by the door. He heard her move. "Don't." The word was so quiet. He thought he had imagined it. He stopped, his hand on his coat. "Don't leave," she said. He turned. She was standing now, holding onto the table to keep her balance. Her face was pale, her eyes desperate. "He will come back," she said, her voice trembling. "Amos, or men like him, he will come back the day you ride out. He knows I am alone. He knows..." She looked at her children, asleep on the floor, exhausted by the fear. I cannot fight him alone." She looked at Elias. She was not just looking at a man who could bring venison. She was looking at a man who could punch Amos Dwyer cold. "Please," she whispered, and the word cost her every last piece of her pride. "Not if you don't have to." Elias looked at her for a long time. He had come to collect a debt, and now she was offering him a new one, a different, heavier kind. He took his hand off his coat. He sat down on the stool by the door, and in the silence, they both knew the arrangement had changed. The winter held on. The thaw came slowly, in false starts, melting the snow into a thick gray slush before freezing it again at night. The truce between them had changed. The pretense of protecting his investment was gone. He was staying He stayed in the lean-to. He still kept his distance, but the air between them was charged. They were bound, not just by the debt or the storm or the children, but by the violence he had committed in her name. And they were bound by the kiss that had not happened. The moment Amos Dwyer had interrupted, it hung in the air, unfinished. Their connection deepened in the small ways of survival. He taught Samuel how to set a snare, and the boy caught 2 rabbits. Clara, seeing the pride on her son's face, looked at Elias over the boy's head. It was a look of grudging, fragile thanks. The real change came in the last gasp of winter. A neighbor, a man named Henry Peterson, whose small homestead was 2 miles down the valley, rode up one night in a panic. The wind was high, whipping a late, wet snow. "Mr. Thorne!" he yelled, pounding on the cabin door. Elias came out, pulling his coat on. "It is my cow." Henry was an older man, his face wrecked with worry. "She is birthing. The calf, it is wrong. It is breached. I cannot turn it. My hands, they are too old. They shake." Elias nodded. "I will come." He went to the lean-to to saddle his horse. When he came back, Clara was standing by the door. She was bundled in her thin shawl, holding a bucket and a stack of clean rags. "I am coming," she said. "Clara, this is no—" "You will need hot water," she said, her voice firm. "And you will need clean hands. I have seen a breached birth. You cannot do it alone." She left Samuel in charge, her voice calm, telling him to keep the door barred and the fire fed. They rode, Elias on his stallion, Clara riding Henry's tired horse. Through the driving snow, the world was a mess of wind and white. Henry's barn was small, dark, and thick with the smell of hay and fear. A single lantern cast huge, dancing shadows. The cow was on her side, her groans low and full of pain. Elias was a man of action. He stripped off his coat, his gloves. He rolled up his sleeves. "Henry, the rope. Clara, the water, as hot as you can make it." Clara built a small fire in the old forge in the corner. She melted snow, she boiled water. She did not panic. She was as calm as he was. For an hour, Elias fought. It was a hard, brutal, bloody business. He had to push the calf back to find its legs. It was a battle of strength, his muscles straining in the dim light. Clara was at his shoulder, holding the lantern steady, handing him the ropes, her face set with concentration. She was not the frail woman he had met. She was as strong as he was. Finally, with one last desperate pull, the calf came free. It was limp, not breathing. "It is dead," Henry whispered, his face falling. "No," Elias said. He was breathing hard, covered in sweat and filth. He grabbed a handful of hay and began rubbing the small body. Hard, clearing its mouth. "Clara, the cold water," he commanded. She brought the bucket of snowmelt. He dumped it over the calf. The small creature gave a huge, shuddering gasp. It kicked its legs. It was alive. Henry began to weep with relief. Elias stood up, exhausted. He walked over to the bucket of hot water Clara had kept ready. He plunged his arms in, the heat stinging, and began to wash the blood away. Clara was standing next to him, in the shadow. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," he said. He was washing his hands. She reached in with a clean rag to help him. Their hands met, tangled together in the warm, dark water. It was an accident, but neither of them pulled away. He stopped moving. He looked at her. Her face was smudged with soot from the fire, her hair coming loose from its bun. She was beautiful. She was the strongest thing he had ever known. He was a man who took what he wanted. He had built an empire by taking... He reached out his clean hand, cupped the back of her head, and pulled her to him. He kissed her. It was not gentle, it was rough, it was desperate. It was the kiss of a starving man. It tasted of smoke and cold air and the salt of his sweat. It was a kiss that held all the unsaid things, the fear, the loneliness, the violence, the spark of life they had just saved. She gasped against his mouth, and then her hands came up, grabbing the front of his shirt, and she kissed him back. She kissed him with a hunger that matched his own, a hunger for life, for warmth, for contact. They broke apart, breathing hard. Henry was on the other side of the barn, cooing at his new calf. He had seen nothing. They stood in the dark, their shadows merging. They did not speak. The walk back to her cabin was silent. The snow had stopped. The moon was a sliver of ice. The silence was not empty. As it had been before, it was full. When they got to the cabin, Elias did not go to the lean-to. Clara checked the children. Samuel was asleep in his chair, the old rifle across his lap. The others were safe in the mattress pile. She gently took the gun from her son and put him to bed. She turned. Elias was standing by the door. He had not moved. He was watching her. The fire was low. The cabin was lit by the dim red glow of the embers. She did not go to her own cot. She walked to his bedroll, which was still on the floor by the door. She untied it and spread his blankets. She looked at him. It was an invitation. It was a surrender. It was a choice. He walked to her. He did not touch her face. He did not kiss her. He touched her hand, the bandaged one. He unwrapped the cloth. The burn was healing. It was a pink, new scar. He held her hand and led her to the blankets. They lay down. They were quiet. They were hungry. They were careful not to wake the children. The act was not what he had imagined. It was not the rough, desperate claiming of the barn. It was a slow, tender, almost guilty exploration. He was a man used to taking. He found himself, for the first time, giving. He was careful with her. He was relearning a language he had long forgotten. For Clara, it was a terrifying resurrection. Her body was a thing of loss, of pain, of duty. She had forgotten it could be a thing of want. It was full of guilt. He was the man who owned her debt. She was the widow of a man she had hated. But in the cold, dark cabin, with the children breathing softly a few feet away, they were just two people, holding on. They hid how much it meant. When they finished, they lay side by side, not touching, staring at the roof. But in the dark, his hand found hers, and he did not let go until dawn. The thaw came for good. The valley opened. Elias knew he had to go to town. They were out of flour. Beth needed a proper tonic for her cough. The children's shoes were falling apart. He rode to Cheyenne. The moment he walked into Hatcher's Mercantile, the store went silent. He was Elias Thorne. He was the king of this county. But the whispers had arrived before him. Amos Dwyer had been here, spending his last coin on whiskey and his last breath on poison. "Morning, Hatcher," Elias said, his voice hard. "Mr. Thorne." The storekeeper was nervous. "Cold Spring." "It is." Elias handed him a list. "I need these things. Now." Hatcher read the list. His eyebrows shot up. 200 pounds of flour, sugar, coffee, salt, lard, and 4 pairs of children's shoes, small sizes, medicine. "This is quite an order." "Mr. Thorne," Hatcher said, trying to be casual. "Stocking up a new line camp?" "Load it onto my wagon," Elias said, ignoring the question. As the clerks worked, Elias heard the whispers. 2 women, by the pickle barrel. It is true. Then, he is keeping her. Scandalous, a harlot, living off his pity. And with those children, Elias turned. His face was so cold, so dark, that the women flinched and fell silent. He paid his bill in gold coin and left. He rode back to the cabin with the supplies and a cold rage in his heart. Clara saw it on his face. When he unpacked the new shoes, the new clothes, she knew. "You went to town," she said, her voice flat. "We needed flour." "What did they say?" she whispered. Elias was silent. He set a sack of sugar on the table. "They called me a harlot, did they not?" she said. "They said you were keeping me, that I am your woman." "Clara, it does not matter." "It does matter," she cried, her voice cracking. "It matters to my children. Do you think Samuel can go to town? Do you think my girls can ever go to a school? They will be mocked. They will be pointed at. The children of the widow Dwyer. The harlot." She backed away from him, her hands twisting in her apron. "You have to stay away, not from here, but from me. When you go to town, you go alone. Do not be seen with me. Please, Elias, you have done so much, but you are ruining us." He looked at her, his jaw tight. He hated this. He hated the shame. He hated the town for casting it, and he hated her for accepting it. He said nothing. He turned and walked out of the cabin. He did not come back that night. He slept in the barn. Clara cried herself to sleep. Sure, she had driven him away. Sure, she had chosen her ruin over his protection. The next morning, she heard a sound she had never heard, the jingle of a complex harness. She opened the door. Elias was not on his stallion. He was on the high seat of his best wagon, a big, black-painted freight wagon, drawn by two magnificent, matched bay horses. It was the wagon of a rich and powerful man. "Get your coat," he said. His voice was an order. "And the children." "What? Where?" "We are going to town, Clara." "No," she said, panic rising. "No, Elias, I will not. I told you." "I do not care what you told me," he said, his voice a low growl. "I will not have you, or them, hiding in this cabin like you have done something wrong. You have done nothing wrong. Neither have I. Get in the wagon." She was terrified, but she was more terrified of the look in his eye. It was the look he had when he fixed the chimney. It was the look he had when he pulled the calf. It was settled. Shaking, she bundled the children. They were excited, wide-eyed. A wagon ride. They rode into Cheyenne. It was midday. The main street was busy. He did not stop at the edge of town. He drove the big wagon right down the center of the street and pulled up, with a flourish, directly in front of Hatcher's Mercantile. The street went silent. Elias Thorne did not get down. He sat on the seat, a king on a throne. He wrapped the reins. And then he turned to Clara. He stood up, and in front of God and all of Cheyenne, he held out his hand. He did not grab her. He held his hand out, like a gentleman in a parlor. Clara stared at his hand. This was it. This was the choice. Hide and be ruined, or take his hand and be his. She put her small, scarred hand in his. He helped her down from the wagon seat. She stood on the boardwalk. He stepped down beside her. He took her arm and tucked it firmly in his. He did not speak. He did not look at the stunned faces of the men on the boardwalk, or the women peering through the windows. He stood, straight-backed and proud, and waited for his family. He helped Samuel down. He helped Alice. He lifted Mary and Beth to the ground. Then, with Clara on his arm, and the children trailing behind them, he walked into the Mercantile. Hatcher dropped the crate he was holding. "Good day, Hatcher," Elias said, his voice booming in the small store. "The medicine you gave me for the child's cough was good, but I need more, and—" He turned to Clara. "What else do we need, my dear?" Clara's face was white. Then it flooded with a red so deep she thought she would faint. But she stood taller. "I need cloth," she said, her voice shaking, but clear. "A bolt of that blue calico, and wool, for the children's winter coats. And," she looked at the children, "candy, a stick for each." Elias smiled. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile. He paid for it all. He walked them back out, loaded the goods, and helped her back onto the seat. He drove out of town, leaving an explosion of gossip in his wake. That night, the cabin was different. It was full of new cloth, full of sugar, full of the sweet, sticky silence of sleeping children. Clara sat by the fire. The children were asleep. Elias was sitting on his stool, cleaning his rifle. She took out the bolt of blue calico. She ran her hands over it. It was smooth. It was new. By the light of the fire, she threaded a needle. She began to sew. She was not mending. She was not patching. She was creating. She was making herself a dress. Elias watched her. He watched the way the firelight caught her hair. He watched the small, concentrated frown on her face. He watched her hand, the one he had bandaged, guide the needle. She stopped. She felt his eyes on her. She looked up, and her face was soft. The fear was gone. The shame was gone. In its place was something new, something fragile, something that felt like hope. "Elias," she whispered. He looked at her. "I don't remember," she said, her voice catching, "what it feels like to belong to anyone." He just held her gaze. He gave a single, slow nod. He understood. The peace that settled in the cabin was fragile, but it was real. It was the piece of the blue calico dress, which Clara finished, her hands sure and steady. It was the piece of the children, whose cheeks had a little color, whose shoes were new and solid. It was the piece of the quiet nights, where Elias would sit by the fire, and she would sit at the table, and the silence was no longer a wall, but a shared space. He was still in the lean-to, but the path between it and the cabin door was worn bare. The new dress hung on a peg, a symbol. She was waiting for the spring thaw, for the mud to dry, for the first Sunday she could wear it. She was waiting to be a person again. The thaw came, and with it, the world returned. It did not return with a blossom. It returned on a tall, thin horse, carrying a man in a black wool suit. Elias was mending the corral fence when the man rode up. Clara was outside, her sleeves rolled up, scrubbing laundry in a tub of melted snow. The man was not Amos. He was worse. He was clean. His face was shaved, and he carried a leather satchel. He looked official. He looked like the law. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. He did not dismount. "I am looking for the widow Dwyer, Mrs. Clara Dwyer." "I am she," Clara said, wiping her chapped hands on her apron. Elias walked over, his face unreadable, his hammer in his hand. The man looked at Elias, his eyes registering the man's size, his clothes, and the way he stood by the woman. A flicker of understanding, and perhaps distaste, crossed his face. "My name is Sneed," the man said, pulling a sheaf of papers from his satchel. "I am a land agent, acting on behalf of the territorial court in Cheyenne." "The court?" Clara's heart went cold. "I have here," Sneed said, his voice a dry monotone, "a petition filed by Mr. Amos Dwyer, sole living relative of the deceased Jedediah Dwyer." He unrolled the paper. "The petition claims that the deceased died intestate, without a will. It claims that under territorial law, a widow has dower rights, but cannot inherit property deeded solely to her husband. As the debt on the property," he looked up at Elias, "as the debt held by Mr. Thorne is in default, the land is forfeit. However, Mr. Amos Dwyer has petitioned to assume the debt in exchange for the title." "What does that mean?" Clara asked, though she already knew. "It means," Sneed said, "that Mr. Amos Dwyer is claiming this land. The petition accuses you, ma'am, of squatting, of occupying a property to which you have no legal claim." The word hit Clara like a slap. Squatting, the same as a drifter, a common criminal. "This is a lie," Elias said, his voice a low growl. "I hold the note. The disposition of the property is my concern." "Not according to this Mr. Thorne," Sneed said, braver now. "Amos Dwyer claims you are compromised, that you are keeping this woman on land that is not hers, or yours. He has filed a morals complaint as well." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She was not just a harlot in the whispers of town. She was a harlot in a court of law. "The petition," Sneed continued, "demands an eviction. The circuit judge will hear the claim in 2 weeks' time. You will be served a summons. If you do not appear, you will be removed. By the marshal." He rolled the paper up. "Good day, ma'am. Mr. Thorne." He turned his horse and rode away, a black speck against the muddy spring landscape. Clara stood, frozen, the wet rag dripping in her hand. Evicted, removed, the marshal. She turned and stumbled back into the cabin, sinking onto the stool. Elias followed, his face a thundercloud. He had never, in all his life, felt such a rage. Amos Dwyer had not just used his fists. He had used the law. He had used Elias's own weapon against him. "Clara," he said, "do not worry." "Do not worry?" she whispered. "Did you not hear him? He called me a squatter. He is taking the land. He is winning." "He is winning nothing," Elias said, his voice sharp. He grabbed his coat. "Where are you going?" "To town. I am going to see the judge. I am going to see the land recorder. I will not have this. I will not have that weasel use my name in a courtroom." "Elias, wait. What will you say?" "I will say the truth. That Amos is a drunk, and that I hold the note. I will have him run out of town for filing a false claim." "And what will you say about me?" she asked, her voice small. Elias stopped. "What do you mean?" "What will you say when they ask what you are doing here? When they ask about the morals complaint?" Elias's face hardened. "It is no man's business." "It is. Elias, it is their business now. You punched him. You took me to town. You are sleeping in my barn. You think they—" She looked down, her shame complete. "You cannot fix this with anger." "I can fix this with money," he said, his voice cold. "I can fix this with power, and that is what I am going to do. Stay here. Bar the door." He rode out, his stallion throwing mud, a man possessed. Clara was left alone. She did not cry. She was too angry. He had not asked her. He had not planned with her. He had just gone to handle it. He was handling her. He was the rich Mr. Thorne, and she was the problem to be fixed. He was gone for 2 days. 2 days of her pacing the cabin, the new blue dress mocking her from the wall. He returned on the evening of the 2nd day. He looked tired, but satisfied. He dismounted, and his face was calm. The storm had passed. "It is done," he announced, walking into the cabin and pouring himself a cup of water. "What is done?" Clara asked, her arms crossed. "The hearing. I spoke to Judge Miller. I explained the situation. I paid a bond, a very large one, against the claim. The judge agrees that Amos Dwyer's petition is flimsy." "So, it is over?" "It is delayed," Elias said. "The judge cannot simply throw it out. Amos has a claim as kin, but the bond ensures the property is not seized. The hearing is pushed back until the full circuit court arrives in June, 3 months. He had bought them time. He looked at her, expecting relief, expecting gratitude. Clara was shaking. Her face was white. "You paid them?" "I posted a bond. It is a legal matter." "You used your money," she whispered. "You rode into town, and you used your money, and you made the problem go away." "Yes," Elias said, confused. "That is how these things are done." "No!" She slammed her hand on the table. The children, startled, looked up from the floor. "That is how you do things. What about me? What about my name?" "I saved your home," he said, his voice rising. "You did not," she cried. "You saved your investment. You proved Amos right. You proved to the entire town that I am a woman who cannot fight for herself, that I am a kept woman, who needs her protector to ride in and pay her way out of trouble. You did not ask me. You did not even tell me. You just fixed me, like a broken fence." Elias was stunned. He had moved mountains. He had used his name, his reputation, his gold. He had stopped the eviction. "What did you want me to do?" he roared, his own anger surfacing. "Let him take it. Let the marshal come and drag you and your children into the mud. You want to fight your own battles. Clara, you have no weapons, you have no money, you have no claim. You would have been on the street in a week." "And what am I now?" she shot back, tears of fury in her eyes. "I am your property. I am the harlot in the cabin. I am the one thing Elias Thorne could not buy, so he just paid off the law. I would rather have faced that judge myself. I would rather have told him the truth, that my husband was a drunk, that his brother is a fiend, and that I—" She stopped. She could not say, "and that I love you." It was not true. It was too complicated. "I cannot trust a man who sees me as something to fix," she said, the words torn from her. "And I cannot love a woman who hates being saved," he threw back, the word love hanging in the air, terrible and unwanted. "You are proud, Clara, but your pride is a sickness. It is the same pride that had you barefoot in the snow, ready to die. You want me to be here, but you hate me for being strong. You want my protection, but you spit on me for giving it. I spit on you because you think your strength makes me weak." "You are weak," he yelled, and the moment he said it, he wished he could take it back. "You are weak, and you are poor, and you are alone, and I am tired of you pretending you are not." Silence. The children were crying. Clara's face did not crumple. It went perfectly, terribly still. She looked at him, and her eyes were as dead as they had been the first day he arrived. "Then go," she whispered. "Go back to your fortress. Go back to your money and your ledgers. We are done." He stared at her. This was it, the impasse, the uncrossable line. He grabbed his coat. He grabbed his rifle. He did not look at the children. He did not look at her. He slammed the cabin door so hard a pan fell off the wall. He saddled his horse, but he hesitated. He looked at the cabin. He looked at the lean-to. He left his main stallion, the big gray, in the corral. He told himself it was because he would be back. He rode out on his spare horse, the one he had ridden to town. He rode away. He was angry. He was hurt. He was right. And he was miserable. Days passed. Clara did not cry. She was energized by a cold. Pure rage. Weak. He had called her weak. She would show him. She would show the world. She had to stand on her own. She had 3 months until the hearing. She had to make this land hers. The first task, water. The creek was a 1/4-mile walk. The old well, the one Jedediah had dug, was too close to the animal pen. It was shallow, and she suspected it was what had kept Beth sick. She needed a new well. She found the spot, a low patch of ground where the grass grew greener. She had seen her father douse for water as a girl. She felt it. This was the place. She took the shovel. The ground was soft from the thaw, but heavy. She began to dig. She worked like a woman possessed. She would wake before dawn, feed the children, and go to the hole. She would dig. Samuel would come and haul the buckets of dirt away. She would dig until her hands bled. She would stop, rebandage them, and dig again. She was not just digging a well. She was digging a grave for the weak woman Elias thought she was. She worked for 4 days. The hole was deep now, over her head. She had to use a ladder. The dirt was turning to thick, cold mud. It was backbreaking. It was dangerous. On the 5th day, it rained. A cold spring rain that turned the yard to soup and the well into a mud pit. She kept digging. She was soaked. She was cold. Her cough, which had never quite left, came back. She ignored it. "Mama, come inside," Samuel begged, his face pale with worry. "It is too cold." "I am almost there. Samuel," she gasped, hauling up another bucket of mud. "We need this. We need our own water." She was feverish. She knew it, but she kept going. The anger was a fire in her belly, keeping the cold out. She reached the bottom of the ladder, her boots sinking in the muck. She felt dizzy. The world tilted. The mud was so heavy. She was so tired. Weak. "I am not," she whispered. She collapsed. She fell, not from the ladder, but into the mud at the bottom of the hole, her body giving out, the fever consuming her. Samuel waited. "Mama?" He looked down the hole. She was not moving. He scrambled down the ladder. She was unconscious, her face half in the muddy water. He tried to lift her. He was just a boy. He could not. He screamed. He scrambled back up, sobbing. He got Alice, together. They managed to get a rope under her arms, and they hauled her, inch by painful inch, out of the well. They dragged her inside, onto the cot. She was covered in mud, her skin burning, her breath a shallow, rattling gasp. It was the lung fever, pneumonia. She did not wake up. Samuel tried. He washed her face. He covered her with blankets. He sat by her for a day. She only got worse. Her breathing was a terrible, wet sound. She was dying, the way her PA had died, the way Beth almost had. Samuel looked at his sisters, huddled by the cold stove. He looked at his mother. He made a decision. He was the man of the house. He went outside. He looked at Elias's stallion, the big gray, standing in the corral. It was a huge, terrifying animal, but it was the only hope. He got the bridle. He did not know how to saddle it. He just did. He climbed the fence, slid onto the horse's bare back. "Go!" he whispered, kicking his small, bare heels into the horse's massive sides. "Go to Elias! Find him!" The horse, sensing the urgency, burst from the corral and thundered east, toward the thorn spread. Elias was in his study. It was a room of dark wood, thick carpets, and glass windows. He was staring at a ledger, but he had not turned a page in an hour. He had been back for 5 days. He had not slept. He had not eaten. He was a wealthy, powerful man, and he was in hell. A ranch hand burst in. "Mr. Thorne, a boy. He just rode in on your gray." Elias was on his feet, his chair crashing over. He ran to the porch. Samuel slid off the horse, his legs buckling. He was covered in mud, shaking from the cold and the ride. "It is," the boy gasped, tears streaming down his face. "It is Mama. She fell. She is like Pa was. She won't wake up. Elias, she won't wake up." The world stopped. The argument, the pride, the anger. It all evaporated, leaving only a cold, absolute terror. He had done this, his pride, his words, weak. He did not speak. He grabbed Samuel, threw him up onto the saddle of the freshest horse in the stable, a fast black mare. He was on his own stallion in a second. "Tell my foreman," he roared to the ranch hand. "No one follows me, no one." He rode. He did not spare the horse. He rode back to the cabin in a blind panic, Samuel clinging to the mare behind him. He burst into the cabin. It was cold. The fire was dead. The children were huddled on the mattress, crying. Clara was on the cot. She was covered in dried mud, her hair matted, her face a pale, waxy gray. Her breath, it was the sound he remembered from his childhood, the sound of his mother's last days. "Clara," he whispered. He fell to his knees by the cot. He touched her forehead. She was burning. "No," he said. It was not a plea. It was a command. "No, you will not." He did not leave her side. He barked orders at Samuel. "Wood, water, fire, now!" He stripped the muddy, wet clothes from her body, his hands shaking. He did not see her as a woman. He saw her as a life. He wrapped her in every clean, dry blanket he could find. He washed her face. He boiled water. He sat by her bed for 3 nights. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He sat in the low chair, his shoulders slumped, and he watched her breathe. He was a man holding a vigil, daring death to come and take her. The children watched him. They saw this powerful, angry man, this king, reduced to a desperate, haggard shadow. He forced water between her lips. He spooned broth, which dribbled out. He held cool, wet rags to her head. He talked to her. "Do not leave me, Clara," he whispered into the dark of the third night. "Dome, you are not weak. You are the strongest person I have ever known. I was the fool. I was the weak one. Do not let my pride be the thing that kills you. Please." On the fourth morning, the sun came up. He was asleep in the chair, his head fallen forward. He woke to a sound, a whisper. "Elias?" His head snapped up. She was looking at him. Her eyes were clear. The fever was gone. She was pale. So pale. She looked like a ghost, but she was looking at him. He could not speak. He just stared. "You look," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Terrible." He let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 3 days. He put his head in his hands, and his shoulders shook. She reached out her hand, thin and weak, and touched his hair. He gripped her hand. He held it to his cheek. "I thought," he started. "I know," she whispered. He looked at her. The argument was gone. The anger was gone. There was only the truth. "I was wrong, Clara," he said, his voice raw. "I was a fool. I tried to fix you. I tried to make you safe. I acted like I owned you. I do not." He knelt by the bed, holding her hand. "I promise you," he said, his voice thick with an oath. I will not play these games again. I do not care about the land. I do not care about the debt. I do not care what the town says." He looked her in the eye. "If I lose every acre I have, if Amos Dwyer wins, and they run me out of this territory, I will still be the man who showed up." She looked at him. She saw the truth. He was not offering to save her. He was not offering to fix her. He was offering to stay. A single tear rolled down her temple. She squeezed his hand. "Then stay," she whispered. "We will fight them, together." The summer came hard and fast. The mud of that long, terrible spring finally dried, turning to dust that rose in fine, brown clouds on the horizon. The day of the hearing in Cheyenne. The air was hot, still, and suffocating. Elias had ridden over the day before. He did not come in the big freight wagon. He came on his stallion, and he rode beside Clara. She was riding the gentle mare he had brought for her, the one that had replaced the horse lost to the winter. Clara was wearing the blue calico dress. Her hair was pulled back, not in the severe, desperate knot he remembered, but in a thick, clean braid. She looked solid. She looked like the land itself, quiet and strong. The children were with them, all 5. They were clean, their hair was combed, and they were wearing the new shoes Elias had bought. They were terrified, but they were quiet. Elias had insisted they come. He had looked at Clara and said, "We will fight them, together. That means all of us. The judge needs to see who he is displacing." They walked into the courthouse, a small, square building that smelled of stale tobacco and old paper. It was packed. The whole town had turned out for the show. Elias Thorne, the cattle king, brought low by a widow and her drunken brother-in-law. Elias saw the faces. Hatcher, the mercantile owner, the women who had whispered by the pickle barrel, and in the front, on a bench near the judge, sat Amos Dwyer. He was wearing a new suit, cheap and ill-fitting. He was sober, which somehow made him look even more greasy. Beside him sat Sneed, the land agent, his leather satchel on his lap. They looked at Elias. They looked at Clara. They looked at the 5 children who huddled close to her. Amos grinned. He thought he had them. Judge Miller came in, a tired man with a gray beard. He banged his gavel. "This court will hear the petition of Dwyer versus Dwyer and Thorne, Mr. Sneed. You may begin." Sneed stood up. He spoke for 10 minutes. His voice was a dry drone. He used words like intestate and dower rights and legal heir. He painted a picture of Jedediah Dwyer, a simple man, and his brother Amos, his rightful kin. He painted a picture of Clara as a squatter. He painted a picture of Elias Thorne as a rich man of questionable morals, who was using his power to, as he put it, cohabitate with a vulnerable woman on land that was not legally hers. Your Honor, Sneed concluded. Mr. Amos Dwyer is a family man. He simply wants what is his. He is prepared, today, to pay Mr. Thorne the original debt in full, in exchange for the title to his family's property. He wishes to take care of his brother's widow. Amos looked over at Clara, his eyes slimy. Thank you, Mr. Sneed, the judge said. He looked at Elias. Mr. Thorne, you are the lien holder. This court understands you have posted a significant bond. What is your response to this petition? Elias Thorne stood up. The room held its breath. He was the biggest thing in that small room, and his silence was heavy. He was not wearing his ranch clothes. He wore a black suit, a clean white shirt. He looked like the banker he was, not the rancher. Your Honor, Elias said, his voice quiet, but it filled the room. My name is Elias Thorne. I own the Thorne Spread, and I am the man who came to collect the debt from Jedediah Dwyer. He looked at Amos, and I am the man who has been living since January, in the lean-to of the Dwyer cabin, protecting my investment and this family. The whispers started. He had admitted it. Mr. Sneed, Elias continued, has presented a fine argument. It has only one flaw. And what is that, Mr. Thorne? The judge asked. The debt he wishes to assume does not exist. Sneed shot to his feet. Your Honor, we have the original note. Mr. Thorne filed it himself. A debt, Elias said, cutting him off. That was erased by me, in my own ledgers, on the 1st of February this year. There is no debt to assume. Mr. Dwyer's petition is what was the word you used? Flimsy. Amos's face went purple. He is lying. He cannot just erase a debt. I can, Elias said, his voice like cold iron. It is my debt. It is my ledger. I can do with it as I please. I chose to erase it. The services of Mrs. Dwyer and her son, in maintaining the property through the winter, were payment enough. He was lying, but it was a lie that felt more true than the truth. So, you see, Your Honor, Elias said, turning back to the judge. Mr. Sneed is correct about one thing. Mr. Amos Dwyer has no claim, but as the debt is gone, neither do I. As the lien holder, it falls to me to dispose of the title. Elias reached into his own coat pocket. He did not pull out a ledger. He did not pull out a gun. He pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. This, he said, is a quitclaim deed. It signs all my interest, all my claim, all my rights to the 80 acres known as the Dwyer homestead over to Mrs. Clara Dwyer, free and clear, to be held by her and her children. He walked to the judge's desk. I have signed it. I just need your stamp. Your Honor, to make it binding. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Hatcher, the store owner, had his mouth open. Amos Dwyer exploded. No! He screamed, standing up so fast his chair fell over. He cannot. It is a trick. That is family land. It is my land. He is buying her. He is buying that. Mr. Dwyer, you will be silent. Judge Miller banged his gavel. You will sit down, or the marshal will sit you down. He cannot. Amos was sobbing now, tears of rage and whiskey sweat on his face. She. Judge Miller looked at Amos with pure disgust. He looked at the paper Elias had given him. He picked up his stamp, inked it, and pressed it down. Thump. Mr. Thorne is the lien holder. The judge said, his voice flat. If he says the debt is erased, it is erased. If he signs the title over to Mrs. Dwyer, it is Mrs. Dwyer's land. This petition is not just flimsy. Mr. Sneed, it is fraudulent. You are lucky I do not sanction you for wasting this court's time. Case dismissed. Amos let out a sound like a dying animal. He saw his free land, his free cabin, his free woman, all vanish. He lunged, not at Elias, but at Clara. "You!" he screamed. He never made it. Elias had not moved. He just put out one arm, his hand flat, and caught Amos in the chest. It was like running into a stone wall. Amos hit the floor, hard. "Marshal," the judge said, "get that man out of my courtroom, and if he comes within 1 mile of Mrs. Dwyer's property, she is to send word. I will have him in jail for 10 years. Amos was dragged out, screaming, raging, defeated. It was over. Elias walked back to Clara. She was standing, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. She was shaking. He did not touch her. He just stood by her. He looked at the town. He looked at the women, their faces a mixture of shock and envy and disapproval. He heard the whispers as they filed out. He gave it to her. He bought her, lock, stock, and barrel. Can you imagine? Elias Thorne, tied to that, with 5 children. He is a fool, weak. She has ruined him. Elias Thorne, the man who had built his life on his reputation. Listen to that reputation being torn to shreds. He heard them call him weak. He heard them call him a fool. He looked down at Clara. She was looking up at him. Her eyes, those washed-out blue eyes, clear and full. She was not the harlot. She was not the widow Dwyer. She was Clara. She was his. He realized, with a sudden, clean shock, that he did not care. He did not care what they said. He had spent his life building a fortress of money and power. It was a cold, empty place. This was real. He had never felt stronger. He put his hand on Samuel's shoulder. "Let us go home," he said. The ride back was quiet. The children, sensing the tension was broken, fell asleep in the back of the wagon, piled together like puppies. Elias and Clara sat on the high seat, the sun setting in front of them, painting the whole vast Wyoming sky in colors of fire and gold. They rode in silence for a mile. She was holding the deed in her lap. Her land, her home. Elias cleared his throat. He was more nervous than he had been in the courtroom. "Clara," he said, not looking at her. We are a family. The children, they need a name. They need a father." She waited. It is not respectable," he said, stumbling over the words. "The town, they will talk. Amos, he will always be a threat. But if—" He pulled the wagon to a stop. The horses stamped, their harnesses jingling in the quiet. He turned to her. "Clara, make it legal, make it respectable. Let me give you my name. Marry me." He had given her the land. Now he was giving her the last thing he had, his name. She looked at his face, this strong, hard man, this man who had saved her, who had argued with her, who had stayed. He was terrified. He was offering her the very thing she thought she wanted. And she knew, with a certainty that settled in her bones, what her answer had to be. "No," she said. Elias flinched. He looked like the boy he must have been, the one who watched his mother die. He looked lost. "No," he whispered. "Elias," she said, and she reached out, taking his hand. Not the scarred, calloused one, the one that was split from his fight with Amos. "Listen to me. You just walked into that courtroom. You tore up a debt. You gave me me. Do you see? For the first time in my life, I am not Jedediah's wife. I am not Amos's property. I am not the harlot of Cheyenne. I am not even your charity. You gave me this deed. I am Clara Dwyer. I own this land. I own this house. But, Clara—" "And I love you," she said, the words finally spoken. I love you, I do, but I cannot be Mrs. Thorne. Not now. A piece of paper in a courthouse, that is what this whole fight was about. That piece of paper nearly destroyed us. I do not want another one." He did not understand. He looked confused. "Do you not see?" she said, her voice soft. "I want this. I want you to ride over that hill tomorrow because you want to, not because a judge or a piece of paper says you have to. I want to wake up every day and know this is not a debt. This is not a contract. This is not a man saving me. This is a man choosing me. Again. Every morning." Elias looked at their joined hands. He was a man of contracts. He had spent his life reading the fine print, and he understood this was a new kind of contract, a harder one that was not settled with a signature, one that had to be signed every single day. He turned his hand, his rough fingers lacing with hers. He nodded. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice thick. "And the day after." He picked up the reins. He drove her home. He kept his word. He did not move into the cabin. He did not move back into the lean-to. He rode back to his own ranch, to his own cold, empty house. But the next morning, as the sun was rising, he was back. He was not on his stallion. He was in his freight wagon, and it was loaded. It was not loaded with flour and beans. It was loaded with lumber. Good, milled lumber from Cheyenne. It was loaded with new tools, new hinges, panes of glass. Clara came to the door, a cup of coffee in her hand. "What is this?" she asked. "This," he said, jumping down from the wagon, "is a ruin. The barn is falling. The corral is weak. The house, it needs new windows." "Elias, you gave me the land. I gave you the land," he said, "but I will not have you living in a shack. You do not need this, Clara, but I want you to have more than just survival. I want you to have more." He accepted her terms. He would not be her husband. He would be the man who showed up. He worked every day. He came at dawn. He left at dusk. He tore down the old, rotting barn. He began to build a new one, a big, strong one, with a proper roof and a hayloft. The children watched. At first, they were shy. But this new Elias, this quiet, steady man, was not the angry, haunted man of the winter. Samuel, who was now 9, picked up a hammer. "Where do I hit?" he asked. Elias did not praise him. He did not pat him on the head. He showed him, "Here, keep it straight. Strike true." They worked together, man and boy. One afternoon, they were setting the new corral posts. It was hot. Elias was sighting down the line to make sure it was straight. "Pa," Samuel said, holding the heavy post, "is this plank straight?" Elias froze. His heart, it did something. It stopped, and then started again, heavy and thick. "Pa." The boy had not been told. He had not been asked. He had just said it. Elias looked at the boy, sweating in the sun, his small face serious, trying to do a man's work. Elias looked over at the cabin. Clara was on the porch, mending a pair of trousers. She had heard. She was watching them. She was smiling. Elias cleared his throat. He looked back at Samuel. He gave a single nod. "It is straight, son," he said. "Now, hold it steady." The seasons turned. The new barn was finished. The cabin had glass in the windows. The new well Elias had dug, deep and true, gave clean, cold water. The valley, which had been a place of death, a place of snow and starvation, was reborn. Spring came again, a real spring, not the false, muddy thaw of the year before. The snows melted, the creek ran high and clear, and the whole valley, from the foothills to the creek bed, exploded with wildflowers. Blue and yellow and purple, the world was alive. The story ends here. It ends on a warm afternoon in May. Clara was in the garden. It was a new garden, fenced and safe. She was growing corn, and beans, and tomatoes. She was no longer surviving. She was growing. She was barefoot, not in the snow. She was standing barefoot in the rich, dark, warm earth, her toes curling into the soil. She was wearing a simple dress, and she was beautiful. There was a sixth child on the way. She stood up, her hand on her back, and watched the valley. She saw him. He was riding toward her, on his gray stallion. He was not coming to collect, or to fix, or to save. He was just coming home. He rode up to the garden fence, and dismounted. He walked toward her, and his face, that hard, angular face, was soft. Clara smiled. She looked at this man. She looked at the new barn. She looked at her children, playing by the creek. She said, her voice soft, "You came to take what was owed, but you gave more than you had." Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West Campfire. We truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Please comment below and let us know where you are listening from, so we can all connect with folks from different parts of the country. And if you enjoyed the tale of Elias and Clara, we invite you to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts.